After 2 terms, North Carolina's senior U.S. Senator says, enough is enough. Welcome to Old North State Politics, where we're talking about the political news of North Carolina's Republican U.S. Senator, Thom Tillis, who will not seek a third term in 2026. And needless to say, it has sent shockwaves through the state. I'm Michael Bitzer, a professor of politics and history at Catawba College and director of the Center for North Carolina Politics and Public Service. And I'm always honored and thrilled to have two distinguished colleagues and, more importantly, friends join me. Dr. Susan Roberts of Davidson College, where she is a professor of political science, and Dr. Chris Cooper of Western Carolina University, where he is the Robert Lee Madison Distinguished Professor of Political Science and Public Affairs and director of the Phil and Connie Hare Institute for Public Policy. Susan and Chris, welcome aboard, and man, what a ride we've got.
I tell you, I didn't expect this on a Sunday, Michael. My Sundays are supposed to be away. There should be no politics Sundays, and we broke that. I don't know.
It was a nice, lazy Sunday until about 2 o'clock, I think, and then
Hmm.
it all broke into North Carolina typical politics.
And
Uh,
then things got hotter.
Yes, to say the least, to say the least. I want to start with a passage from the rather lengthy statement that Senator Tillis sent out on Sunday, June 29th. And he said, quote, as many of my colleagues have noticed over the last year and at times even joked about, I haven't exactly been excited about running for another term. That is true since the choice is spending another 6 years navigating the political theater and partisan gridlock in Washington, or spending that time with the love of my life, Susan, our 2 children, 3 beautiful grandchildren, and the rest of our extended family back home. It's not a hard choice, and I will not be seeking re-election. Susan, what was your immediate reaction to hearing the news?
Well, I really thought that given that he had hired three heavy hitters from the Trump administration, a data collector, a fundraiser, and someone that was also, I think, was good about the media relations. That to me, and that was recent. That was maybe a couple of weeks ago. And that is, as you both know, that is the single biggest deterrent to a primary, and that is a war chest. And I thought, he's in it to win it. I think it was one of those decisions that even his staff did not see coming.
Chris, what was your reaction?
Same as Susan. I found myself usually in agreement with Susan. This is no exception. I was surprised. He had given, they sort of go through the checkbox of like things people do when they're serious about running for office. Check, 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 right? He did it all down to, I think as Susan just recounted very well, this announcement of these heavy hitters, as Susan calls them, who were Trump aligned and who he had hired. He'd also announced, of course, Paul Shoemaker, who is, the most prominent Republican consultant in the state running his campaign again. And so, look, I thought the guy was running for office. I thought he would probably get through the primary, and I was surprised that he did this.
Chris, give us a little reminder of how Tillis got to be the senior senator from North Carolina.
Yeah. So, I mean, here's a guy who, not too far from Michael and Susan, actually, was a Mecklenburg County guy,
Mhm.
was, I think, went to the University of Maryland for his undergraduate school, but worked for IBM, worked for PricewaterhouseCoopers. And then he was, his first office was as a town commissioner in Cornelius, North Carolina. And he did that for a couple of years and actually stepped down a little early. Sounds familiar, right? Because he was moving to a slightly different place within the county. Then he decided to run for the North Carolina House. And it's interesting, when he ran for the House, it was a Republican friendly seat, but he had to take on a Republican. This was not an open seat. This was a tough election, right? And so he was able to knock off a Republican incumbent, was able to get into office. I think in his second term became whip of the then minority party, the Republican Party. And just going back last night, just reading old newspaper articles about that time and what Thom Tillis was talking about. It was very, almost like George W. Bush, if you will, Republican kinds of issues. He talked a lot about school choice. He talked a lot about the economy. He talked a lot about deregulation. This was not a culture warrior early on, really, any time, right? So then in 2010, we see this massive sea change. I would argue perhaps the most important election in North Carolina history, the 2010 election, at least in the last 100 years, right? Where our General Assembly flips from Democratic to Republican control for the first time, both chambers in 100 years. And Tillis was before and then known as the person who would probably be Speaker and ended up being Speaker. So he kind of talked across the aisle, right? I was going back and reading old campaign ads, and the pitch for Thom Tillis early on was here's a guy who can talk to the then majority Democratic Party. And of course, he decides to run for Senate. Has a tough campaign, but is able to pull that out, and then has what we think is going to be a tough reelection campaign that was somewhat tough, but made a little bit easier by Cal Cunningham's affair that was revealed towards the end, this kind of October surprise. So you look at some of these folks at this stage of their career and you say, I had easy elections the whole way through. Not the case for Thom Tillis. You look at some folks and you say, they've changed colors all the way through, right? The kinds of issues they care about change. Not Thom Tillis. He kind of is the guy he has been for good or ill. And I think depending on your perspective, it may be a little bit of both.
Susan, you're in Mecklenburg County, kind of right next to Tillis's home ground. Talk to us a little bit about what he has been perceived in Mecklenburg County.
Well, I think he's been perceived as someone that is fair-minded. I have mentioned to a class that's adjacent to what he's done, and as Speaker of the House, he introduced some legislation about reparations at the county level to victims of sterilization. That wasn't something that was visible. That's something that most people don't remember. And there was no political calculus in that. Who is this going to win? What votes is this going to win? And I think that, as I was telling you earlier, a little known factoid is I worked on a Lake Norman Chamber of Commerce little workshop, and I was the one that had the little sliver about campaign ethics. And he was in the audience as before he ran for county commission and or board of commissioners. And I think people looked on him as fair. There were people that were quick to paint him, and especially Davidson's a bubble, that were quick to paint him as being calculated and coy about the later decisions. But I don't think he made a lot of waves in terms of what he did early on. I may be wrong, but the big issue in the Hagan-Tillis race was one about who's the better North Carolinian. I don't think it was expensive. Most expensive race in the country. I've tried to look back. It wasn't the dirtiest. I didn't see it as being that dirty. Hagan sat out the third debate, so it was really 2.5 debates. But I don't know that it was that dirty and ugly. And I don't know that it would have been that you could say that about Cunningham. He didn't have, I don't think he raised the issue at all. And you correct me. Did he raise the issue about Cunningham and morals? Maybe a smidgen.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Chris.
I don't recall that, and go back and rereading that being, the primary rhetorical strategy by any stretch. And I think it's telling that, I don't know that Tillis and Cunningham are palling around on every weekend, but they appear to have a cordial relationship today. And they, I think at UNC had an event that they did together where they talked a bit about bipartisanship. I think that doesn't happen if Tillis had leaned into the worst angels of his nature, frankly.
Yeah, then that kind of leads me into thinking about, we've had these kind of, competitive, high finance dollar campaigns in the past. Describe for me what you think North Carolina will be like in next year's midterm elections now that we have an open seat for the U.S. Senate. Susan, you want to start us off?
Undoubtedly, it will be the most expensive Republican primary in the country. That's a given in my view. I don't think you're going to have any consideration of Laura Trump being a shoe-in. I think that's going to be tight race. I don't think North Carolinians just want someone to swoop in and say, I'm Donald Trump, point two. I do think that it's going to be a race in which I don't think that you can naturally say it's defaulting to reelection calculus by Trump, but it's going to be a MAGA decision. And I ask both of you whether or not how much do you think the purple status of North Carolina is going to play into how this race is conducted, the primary race. And a lot of it depends on the general elections, too.
Well, we've got the author of an anatomy of a purple state on cue here. So, Chris, take it away.
Sure. Yeah. I think in terms of the general, the purple state status is going to matter a ton. I don't think that's going to enter into a lot of primary calculations, right? So North Carolina, it's fascinating. We get these purple outcomes, the purple state. But at the same time, that doesn't mean we have 7.5 million purple folks running around. It's not that at all, right? We've got about 50% of them who are pretty far left and about 50% who are pretty far right. And that averages to something that looks like purple. So I'm expecting this to be a MAGA off, right, in the primary. So, I do think if Laura Trump does get in, I think that probably does clear the field a bit. But assuming she doesn't, I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, a lot of folks are saying, well, who is Trump going to endorse? And look, that may happen, but I would just at least raise the possibility that maybe Trump doesn't endorse. So let's just sort of play this out for a second. What was Trump's goal here? Trump's goal was to get Thom Tillis out of office. Well, guess what? Game, set, match. It's over, right? It worked. He's done.
Yeah.
And so then if you get, just to grab two names that get mentioned a lot, not that we think these will be the two. Let's just say you get Pat Harrigan, right? Fresh member of Congress, very MAGA aligned, has a lot of things that Trump seems to look for in candidates. And then you get Michael Wiley, somebody who has a good personal relationship with Trump as well, right? Former North Carolina GOP head, now co-chair of the national GOP. They run against each other, both get the MAGA brand on their side. I could very easily see Donald Trump saying, I got what I want. Either one of these guys, I'm a winner. Why would I stick my nose in and perhaps lose the primary and get that egg in my face? I don't know that. I have nobody returns my phone calls in Mar-a-Lago, but I think we need to open ourselves to that possibility that maybe Trump got what he wants and he just kind of stays out.
Well, and I think too, if the numbers don't say that Laura Trump is going to win, she's not going to jump into the race because that would be a slap in the face for Donald Trump. And that is not something he wants in North Carolina.
Well, kind of talking about, the president getting what he wanted. I think it's helpful, to kind of set the context up of how we got here just in the past couple of days, literally. And I want to get your opinions on that kind of, sudden cascade that led to Tillis's announcement. Tillis came out as one of very few Republicans to say he was not going to vote for starting the debate clock on the big, beautiful bill, but also said, I'm not going to vote for final passage on it. And he kind of referenced that in his statement. He said, too many elected officials are motivated by pure, raw politics who really don't give a damn about the people they promised to represent on the campaign trail. After they get elected, they don't bother to do the hard work to research the policies they seek to implement and understand the consequences those policies could have. In thinking about that part of the statement and Tillis making the announcement, he was a no. Then on Saturday night, the president sent out in a late night post, I'm going to see somebody primary challenge Tillis. And then less than 48 hours, Tillis says, enough is enough. I'm out of here. I'm curious what y'all think about this notion of the nationalization effect really overriding elected officials and their concerns about the voters back home, about the constituents and the policies that impact them and how they're going to vote on legislation. Chris, you want to take an initial stab at that?
Sure, yeah, happy to. I mean, I think we do. We talk a lot about nationalization, how much it's infected every part of North Carolina political life and political life in general. And so, yeah, I think some of what you're hearing Thom Tillis say is like, I'm not on board, right? I still care about what this means for North Carolinians above and beyond what I may be hearing, on K Street. I also wonder if one thing we're hearing from Thom Tillis is the being in the United States Senate is not as good of a deal as it used to be. And I don't mean that like it was some great deal and they're having this great life before and it was tons of fun and it was recess all the time. But what I do mean is the Senate we used to talk about, right? So you go back and read the Federalist Papers, right? The Senate is the cooler branch. The Senate has a 6 year term instead of the 2 year terms, right? The Senate is the one that has the statewide concerns, so it doesn't have to sort of follow the riffraff of politics like that dirty House does. Well, I think maybe one thing Thom Tillis is saying is that Senate is gone, and the Senate that is left is one that looks a lot more like what we used to talk about being part of the House of Representatives. And Tillis is saying that ain't a great deal for somebody's life anymore. And John Boehner obviously made a very similar in some ways kind of decision to step down. We saw obviously in the House, but as well, but Patrick McHenry make a similar kind of decision. I think American political life as an elected official is harder than it used to be, and the calculus may be changing. And so, yeah, let's remember what this means for Tillis in the election and everything now, but
Yeah.
also what this means for candidate recruitment and emergence 20 years from now. I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah.
Well, and too, the then senior senator from Arizona, Jeff Flake,
That's
made a
right.
decision because he was going to be primaried. It was going to be expensive. He probably would lose. But in a book of his, he said, I used to have an idea of what it meant to be a Republican. Now it's just being angry. And I think looking at that, he thought, where is the Republican Party going, and have they lost their way? Pre-Trump, there were some things that anybody about casting their vote, and I think there are two things: casting your vote, the big beautiful bill, and making a decision to run again. Used to consider things like my constituency, priorities, my party, but things again that were not so, cut and dried. What your views were about, say, civil liberties or other things, the economy. And Trump, Tillis, wasn't a fan of tariffs. And I also think, of course, the biggest consideration in running for office is, can I win? And you can't beat somebody with nobody. And the Democrats, should they have put up Roy Cooper, that would have been any independents or moderates that Tillis may have attracted with a voting record that was not fidelity to Trump, but loyalty. That would have siphoned off those voters. Roy Cooper would have had those voters, not Thom Tillis on the basis of certain votes.
Yeah, I want to kind of in the discussion here and then move into, what we would expect, on both sides of the aisle with open primaries. But Tillis ended his statement saying, quote, "I still look forward to continuing to serve North Carolina over the next 18 months. I look forward to solely focusing on producing meaningful results without the distraction of raising money or campaigning for another election." And this is the sentence that really got me. I look forward to having the pure freedom to call the balls and strikes as I see fit and representing the great people of North Carolina to the best of my ability. Susan, how do you see this calculus of congressional decision making by Tillis moving forward in his last few months as now a lame duck senator?
Sure, I think that you take away that calculus of what I'm doing is for reelection, and you can vote more conscience vote. You can't look at, say, oh, Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski are the people that, boy, if we convince them, Trump will be against Tillis no matter what happens, and there'll be Truth Social post. But I think now Tillis can make some decisions that might be ones that he thinks are in the best interest of the country. And I think it will stop people from saying that Tillis is just being coy. He's just playing around with heads of, am I going to vote for him? Am I not? And I think that will free him to say, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to vote against the January 6th pardons because I don't think it was a good idea. So I think it will free him up to do some things that we can't see into his heart, but I think it will free him up tremendously to not have to go along. And I think he will be pro-Trump. Will he be pro-MAGA? I don't really think so.
Chris, do you see Tillis as being free range now?
Yeah, he's free range is great. I mean, he's an unplugged Michael, but I kind of like free range. Free range Tillis, right? It's like your eggs. So yeah, I think that's exactly what we're going to see. And he's somebody who knows a little bit. Maverick might be too much of a stretch, but an independent thinker, somebody's willing to work across the aisle. I think we're going to see that more. I think we already are seeing that more, right? If you look at the speech that he just had on the floor, I mean, he's been pretty clear about what he thinks the big beautiful bill, the triple B, would do to Medicaid and to the pockets of real North Carolinians. So I expect to see more of it. I think Donald Trump got what he wanted, and that Thom Tillis is not running again. But at the same time, I think for the next 18 months, I think Thom Tillis will be a bit of a thorn in Donald Trump's side legislatively.
But it can no longer threaten him with being
Yeah,
primaried or losing.
that's right.
Yep, and he's got the wild card, and it'll be interesting to see if he pulls others, a Murkowski, a Collins, others to say, "Hey, let's do some good here in terms of the dynamics." Um, Now
Yeah,
all the attention is moving to the open primaries that we will have next March. Tell me what you're thinking about in terms of the early dynamics, who you think is going to be in the mix. We talked a little bit about Roy Cooper on the Democratic side. Let's start with the Republicans. Chris, your thoughts on what an open Republican nomination battle might play out like?
it's going to be fascinating, right? I mean, there's what a baker's dozen names I think that are already being
Yeah.
floated. I mean, it seems like Michael Watley and Pat Harrigan we mentioned before, I think are on almost everybody's list. But Tim Moore, I believe, Reba Jones up at Spectrum News had put out a tweet saying that Moore is actively considering this. Greg Murphy, I think, is another name we've seen
Mhm.
come up. Dan Bishop is a name that folks have been banning about. I saw Brad Knott's name come up. Dallas Woodhouse put that out in a tweet. Um, Chuck Edwards was mentioned by somebody. I think if you are a sitting member of Congress with an R next to your name and you're not Virginia Fox, then you have been floated. Somebody floated John Bell. I've heard some speculation about Phil Berger. I'm not buying it, but some people
Yeah.
are trying to sell it. So
I've
it's going
heard
to be
Richard
interesting.
Hudson. So
Richard Hudson's one. I should have
Yeah.
mentioned that. It's come up a lot before. Whether he would want to give up an incredibly powerful position in the House for this Senate, I don't know. Um, but this is going to be potentially a hot mess. I still think if Laura Trump gets in, perhaps these names disappear, right? I don't know who wants to run against the Trump on the Republican side, but assuming she doesn't get in, we could see a pretty massive field like we haven't seen in a
Yeah.
while. And if Roy Cooper doesn't get in the Dem side, same thing.
Well, and I
Susan,
think,
how do you see the
yeah,
GOP side?
I think two of the people that might run in the primaries have Watley. They have experience in fundraising, and money will be an issue. They can get the money. I think also what we define in political science as a quote unquote quality candidate. I believe all these candidates, besides Michelle Morrow and um, uh, I think she was the one. She and Mark Robinson are just you know, I'll bet they're out of the picture. How's that? That's safe. But I think that's going to be something to be considered. Can they raise the money? They've all passed. They don't need to be vetted. I think that's probably already taken care of. And holding office is a really big indicator about whether or not you would be prepared to be in the Senate.
So on the Democratic side, we've already got Wiley Nickel having started up his campaign, but it feels like the Laura Trump of the Democrats is, as we've mentioned before, Roy Cooper. Susan, how are you seeing the Democratic race kind of thinking about?
Well, I think Kristen Gillibrand has come out and talked about really it needs to be Cooper because he had the name recognition. He is not one that has attracted a lot of negative attention. And he's one like your uncle. He's not very, it's unlike him to run a very negative campaign. And I think that he would have a very good chance. Why he's not making some overtures that I have not seen. Maybe there's some there that I just haven't noticed. He's been very quiet about whether or not he's going to jump in. And I know there are probably people that have been heavily recruiting him. So I don't know what's going to be his calculus about should I get in.
Chris, what's your thoughts on the Democratic side?
Yeah, very similar to Susan. I mean, yeah, Roy Cooper is, he said he was going to tell us his decision when he got back from Harvard, and he's been back from Harvard for a month now, I believe. So he's obviously waiting on something. I don't know what that is. I think the most commonly told lie in North Carolina politics today is that when somebody says, "I know what Roy Cooper is going to do." I think unless your name
Yeah.
is Roy Cooper or Kristen Cooper, it's all maybe Morgan Jackson. Then it's really a guess. So Cooper's in. We got one kind of primary. Cooper's not in. I think it's going to be really interesting, right? So Wiley Nickel is, who obviously had been in the state Senate, who had been in the United States Congress for one term, and then his district changed, so he decided not to run again. He's been running for Senate for a couple of years now, it seems like. I don't, obviously he's going to stay in if Cooper gets in. I've heard Rachel Hunt's name kind of bandied about a little bit. I don't know if that's wishful thinking or not. Obviously, a lot of folks are going to be turning to Jeff Jackson. I believe Thomas Mills had a piece about how Jeff Jackson would be the candidate if of his choosing anyway, if Cooper didn't get in. And so yeah, it's going to be a little bit of a scramble if Roy Cooper doesn't get in. You got Kathy Manning sitting out there. I haven't heard her name come up a lot lately, but here's somebody who was in Congress, respected, didn't go out for any sort of bad reason. She's also hanging out there. So there's, it's not a wealth of candidates exactly, but there's still a number of kind of high profile folks who might get in, but they're all waiting on Roy Cooper.
And I think we have to look at the primary in New York mayor's race. That really depended on a new style, not a new style, but an aggressively newer style of campaigning. I'm not sure I see Roy Cooper doing that, but you never know. I think it's going to take that. And, as a native North Carolinian, I know who Jim Hunt is. Very few people would know who that is. So it doesn't give Rachel Hunt that advantage, that name recognition.
Yeah, I think on both sides, the potential for a complete free-for-all on both sides would have some really interesting dynamics. And all this has to, start ramping up here fairly soon. We think about next March, but candidate filing is going to start occurring at the end of this year here in North Carolina for that March primary. So certainly people are going to want to ramp up their campaigns and their organizations. And as Susan mentioned, the massive war chest that's going to be required for both of these. Um, Kind of wrapping things up here, what haven't we talked about that our audience, probably both inside and outside of the state of North Carolina, need to know about next year's U.S. Senate race? Chris, I'll start off with you.
Um, maybe something this is making me think about is the way we define candidacy, right? It's we can get into the race itself, but we act like this is a you're either in or you're out. And I think as Thom Tillis showed us, candidates, it's not final until you declare. And so right now, this invisible primary piece, as the three of us talk about sometimes, is really at play. And so when somebody comes out and says they're running, I mean, it's not that they're lying to you, you shouldn't take them at their word, but it is tentative until they file the paperwork. And so I think maybe it's just a good reminder to all of us that as we front loaded this whole process, it's still tentative until the end. And so we're going to see a whole lot of people come out probably and declare soon. Are some of those folks going to do like Jeff Jackson did a few years ago and pull out of it? I think probably so. So it's all tentative till the end.
Mhm.
I
Susan.
think, yeah, I think it's going to be something that you cannot escape the polarization, and the word toxic has been used over and over, but I can't think of any better word. And I think that in North Carolina, it will be pugilistic. It cannot be anything that's polite. And can Roy Cooper do that? I think Jeff Jackson surely can. And again, the calculus, as we all know, is whether or not you can win. You don't want to get in it if you're going to spend a lot of money, put your family through things, and really have to get favors. And even if you're in Congress, the one thing that they don't like is to be on the phone almost daily trying to raise money. And trying to raise money is the worst thing that a member sees that they have to do. It's not casting the votes. It's not representing your constituency. It's not begging for money, but strong arm people like I need the money to run, and Again, I think you look at some of the things that you see in terms of what Tillis had in terms of the ability, potential ability to get that money out of state money, PAC money, industry money.
Yeah, the dialing for dollars, I think once again we will be talking about North Carolina setting another record, if not for this Senate election. Maine is always talked about as a competitive election. There may be some Georgia probably will be as well, but once again, North Carolina is going to be kind of the epicenter of the battle, particularly for control of the U.S. Senate, because Democrats have to have the seat if they're going to get anywhere close to a working majority yet again in terms of the numbers there. So this has been extremely enlightening and extremely helpful. Thank you both for your time. My thanks to both Chris and Susan for their willingness to share their expertise. We tape this on Monday, June 30th, 2025. And undoubtedly, as soon as I post this, there will be more news to watch in what we lovingly refer to as the wild world of NC politics. But we hope to be able to do this again in the future. Chris and Susan, thank you again for your time, and thanks for joining us as well.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Michael.